We're looking at a study on the life of Esther. We're calling it Wake Up, Esther. This particular lesson, I want to focus on Esther's passion, the thing that motivated her and caused her to accomplish such great things. We're going to use for our text Esther, the 5th chapter, verses 1 and 2. Now, it happened on the third day, this is after 3 days of prayer and fasting, that Esther put on her royal robes and stood in the inner court of the king's palace, across from the king's house, while the king sat on his royal throne in the royal house, facing the entrance of the house. It's giving quite a description there of exactly what she's walking into. So it was, when the king saw Queen Esther standing in the court, that she found favor in his sight. And the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. This, of course, is the crucial verse in the whole story that turns everything around. And as I said, this is what reveals her passion, Someone has well said, passion is like fire inside us. It's what motivates you. It's what keeps you going. The truth is, the purpose of God should be our passion for life. It should be the thing that's the fire burning within us. Esther had passion, strong passion within her, and I want to focus on 5 different areas of her passion. The first area is what I'm going to call the purity of Esther's passion. The purity of her passion. Now, let's put ourselves into this story. Let's go back to Shushan. Let's go back to the king's palace. And I think we would find it very similar to our world today. People are people, and Shushan was full of people that was thinking only about themselves. As I said, that sounds very familiar, doesn't it? Very much like our world in which we live. But Esther wasn't like that. Esther was not there because she even desired to be there. She's there because of the circumstances of life, and she finds herself now caught up in this beauty contest. Can you imagine what that beauty contest must have been like? Imagine the rivalry that's going on behind the scenes. I mean, some of the stories that we have heard about the Miss America pageants and such, and all, so many times it's a fight going on behind the scenes. I am sure that's exactly what was taking place in that beauty contest, because the reward was whoever wins the contest gets to be the queen. And so there would have been a lot of young women that's doing everything to their advantage to try to get the king's attention. That's what everybody's focused on. How can I attract the king? But Esther wasn't like that. That was not the way that she was motivated. Now, what is it that this verse keeps coming up in this story about favor? Favor. What was it that set Esther apart from all the other girls? What was it that caused her to gain favor? It says, in the eyes of everyone who saw her. Now, that's more than just natural beauty. It's obvious she's just as beautiful on the inside as she is the outside. And this young woman has something within her. I'm going to call it the purity of her passion. The purity. She has the look of sweet innocence. See, what so many of those girls forgot in this beauty contest is the king is not just looking for a woman. The king is looking for a wife. That's what he's looking for, and that's what sets Esther apart, because she's not all wrapped up in the rivalry of trying to win this beauty contest and to be number one. No, there was that sweet innocence about her that attracted everyone's attention. Now, let me talk about the second area. Let's call this the beauty of Esther's passion, the beauty. And the reason I use these words is, again, this word favor. The Bible said she found favor everywhere she turned. In chapter 2 and verse 15, it said, favor in the eyes of all that beheld her. Now, that's a remarkable statement. This beauty that she has was God's grace that was in her. God's grace had elevated her from being an orphan slave to becoming the queen of Persia. What an amazing story. It's no wonder they say truth is stranger than fiction, because in this story, it's Esther, the orphan girl. Do you realize what's happening here? All of the ugly things that had happened in Esther's life. We don't know how her parents died. We don't know if they took sick and died, if they were murdered. We don't know the background. All we know, a little girl was left without a mommy and a daddy. That all the bad things that happened as a slave in a foreign country. And yet, none of that could keep God's grace from shining through in her life. And the truth is, grace is beautiful anywhere you find it. It doesn't matter where it may be. An orphan, a slave, a foreign country, it does not matter. God's grace is beautiful. And it's beautiful when it's found in our lives as well. And I think this is a thing that sets Esther apart from everybody else. Why she found favor in the eyes of all that beheld her was because she had God's grace within her life. And it had completely changed this young woman into the beautiful person that she really was. Now, let me talk about the third area. The third area I want to discuss is what I'm going to call the power of Esther's passion. The power of her passion. See, grace never forces itself on anyone. What it does, it uses its power to influence others. It's a true statement that I've tried to live with or live by this principle for so many years. The most important things in life are not what you can do. The most important things in life are what you can influence others to do. Now that's where we get into multiplication. That's what Jesus did with his 12 disciples. You go on and you look at every great leader, and they multiply their influence upon others. This is what Esther has. Esther has not something that she comes in demanding her rights. No, not at all. She comes in with grace, but with influence. See, let me ask you a question. In that culture, the king sat on a golden throne holding a golden scepter. Now, here's my question. Who is the most powerful? The one holding the scepter, or the one reaching out and touching the top of the scepter? I think it's quite obvious that the person that is touching the top of the scepter has influence over the king. Now, do you understand that's exactly what God has done for us? See, Esther's passion enabled her to influence the one that held the scepter. And this is the way that her mode of operation, this is the way she accomplished things. Not by demanding it, not trying to force it. No, it was the grace that revealed itself in influencing others. There's a good parable that is told about the sun and the wind, that they were saying, which is the strongest? And the sun said, I'm the strongest. And the wind, no, I'm stronger than you are. And so they decided on a contest. And the contest was that the wind said, I will blow the coat off of that man. And he blew and he blew. And the harder he blew, the tighter the man gripped the coat around him. After he was finished and had failed, the sun began its warm rays upon the man. In a little bit, he's sweating and he's taking off his coat. Now, see, this is the way that grace operates in our life. The power is the power to influence others. Who has the greatest power? I really believe God has delegated that to the one that's touching the top of the scepter. Do you understand that is exactly what the Bible says that God has done for you and I? Christ has invited us to sit with him in heavenly places. The book of Ephesians, the 2nd chapter and verse 5. Christ invited us to sit with him in his throne. That means we have influence upon Christ. You better believe it. Why else would God answer our prayers? See, it's this using the authority of Christ. Jesus sent us to go in his name, in my name. Go ask in my name, whatever you ask in my name. That is the power of influence, or laying your hand on the top of the golden scepter. That was the power that was manifest in the life of Esther. Now, there's a fourth area that I want to talk about with the passion of Esther, and that is the courage of her passion. It was grace that elevated her to the favor that gave her the ability to be in this position where she could come into the king's presence. However, she had not been invited for 30 days. That's a long time, and I find it is quite interesting here that the first queen wouldn't come when she was invited, and the second queen, Esther, came when she wasn't invited. She comes into the king's court without an invitation. And according to that culture, that was a death sentence, unless the king held out the golden scepter, which he did. When the king saw Esther standing there, it's quite obvious. He is shocked by her presence. What would cause her to do such a thing? What? And he said to her, what do you want, Esther? I mean, this is not proper protocol. This is not the way it's supposed to be. Why are you here? He understands she has risked her life to walk into his presence. I think this is something that you and I need to consider, because what is important enough to risk your life? What is that important? And that's what the king is asking. What do you want? I mean, why would you do such a thing to walk into my presence? And he knew if he had not held out the golden scepter, even though she was a queen, she would be dead. She would be killed. I ask you the question, what is it that's important enough in your life to risk your life for? I truly believe in the principle that until we find something big enough to die for, we do not have anything big enough to live for. What is it that we are willing to die for? What are we willing to risk our lives? As I read the book of Acts, I come across this statement about the apostles, and one of the statements that he makes about them, men who hazard. In other words, they risk their lives for the sake of Christ. I challenge you with that, because Jesus gave his all for us. What are you willing to give for him? Esther was willing to risk her life for her people. She was willing to risk her life and stand before this earthly monarch, before this king, willing to die for what she believed. Do you have that kind of faith in your life? What is it, the things within your life that are worth dying for, that you are willing to risk your life for? Those are the things that will make the difference. And this is the passion that was within Esther that turned this whole situation around. If it had not been for Esther, we don't know exactly what would have taken place in the Persian kingdom, because the death sentence has already been set for the Jews. We don't know if it would have been another situation like Hitler and the 6 million Jews that were killed. We don't know. All we know, Esther was willing to risk her life for what she believed, and God used that to turn this whole situation around. There's a verse of Scripture found in the book of Romans, the 6th chapter and verse 11 that says, "Consider yourself to be dead indeed to sin." Now that's a good statement, a powerful statement. Consider yourself to be dead indeed to sin. If you're dead to it, then sin has no power or influence over you. It cannot control you. The truth is, you can't threaten dead people. I was with some refugees not too long ago, and I saw, they gave me the personal story of one of the young men that had been beaten by the police, and they brought him in, and he was all bruised and bloody, and they washed him up, put clean clothes on him. He goes right back out on the streets to witness again. Why? Because you can't threaten dead people. He had already dealt with that question. He was ready to give himself for the one that gave his all for him. See, it's only when we come to that place and have that kind of passion, that's the only time that we're really going to influence others. When we die to ourselves, then we can truly begin to live toward God. That is Esther. The response of Esther to the queen shocked him. What she literally said to the king was, when he said, "What do you want, Esther?" I'm going to paraphrase this, but this is literally what she said. "I want to spend some time with you. Would you come to my banquet that I am preparing for you?" Now, the truth, I don't think Esther had premeditated all of these things. I think some of these things are spontaneous, that come out of our heart, come out of our spirit at exactly the right moment, because it was God's wisdom giving Esther the ability for God to work on the king's conscience. And what she doesn't know, the king is going to be very restless that night, is not going to sleep well at all, and going to bring in the history books to try to, bore him to sleep. But what God was doing was preparing the king's heart. It was that night that it was brought to his attention that Mordecai the Jew had saved his life, and he had done nothing to honor Mordecai. He hadn't even said a proper thank you. And so what God is doing here, he's giving the right opportunity for Esther to have a private setting with the king and Haman so that she can reveal her thoughts. Now that is wisdom, because there are some things that are not to be revealed in public settings. If that moment she would have made her accusation, there would have been a lot of people in that room that would have been on Haman's side. There would have been a lot of people that immediately would have begun clamoring against her and for Haman. She didn't do that. In wisdom, she said, "I want to spend some time with you. Would you and Haman come to a banquet I have provided for you?" Oh, the wisdom of those words. In this private setting, she is going to be able to tell the king the truth, confront Haman for what he has done, because Haman hasn't a clue that Esther is also a Jew. Now, let me talk about the fifth area. The fifth area, I'm going to call it the persistence of Esther's passion. The persistence of her passion. In the 8th chapter of Esther, you find her once again before the king. This time she is not standing in his royal court with everyone there. No. The Bible said she is kneeling at his feet. Now that's wisdom. It's wisdom to know when to stand and when to kneel. She is kneeling at his feet. It's Esther, and then they call in Mordecai because she has explained who he is in her life. And the Bible said, as she knelt at his feet, she was imploring him with tears to save her people. I'm not really sure. I can't prove these things, but I have this sneaky suspicion that this is a woman's private weapon. I know in the relationship I have with my wife, my bride, oh my, I hate it when she cries. Because if she cries, she wins. And I can't stand to watch her cry. Just anything, stop crying, don't cry. I really think God made women that way, and I think they know that. I can't prove this, but as she's kneeling there before him, and she's crying, and it's almost like the king is saying, please, please, Esther, just don't cry. See, there's no argument against tears. No argument. How can you argue with it? Tears are a sign of our passion. Our passion. Jesus was known for his tears. It's one of the famous verses in the Bible, John 9:35, where he says, Jesus wept. We all memorized that when we were children because it's the shortest verse in the Bible. Jesus wept. He was known for his tears. My question to you is, what is it that makes you cry? What do you cry about? What is it that just causes that spontaneous release and you begin crying? As a young man, I didn't cry a lot. I was taught by a father wrongly that men don't cry. But Jesus is the man. Jesus, he is the only one that's the perfect example. And I've already quoted the scripture where Jesus wept. Jesus cried. Yes, men do cry. And my daughters have said to me many times in these past few years, Daddy, you cry easier than you used to. That is true. That is very true. And I make no apology for it. Because something's going to make you cry if you have passion. What dry eyes reveal? Dry eyes reveal souls with no passion. There's no consuming fire within you. There's nothing within you that touches your emotions so much that your eyes fill with tears and you begin crying. Esther knew what to do, how to respond. And the way that she is responding to the king, she is kneeling at his throne. And at his throne, she begins weeping and crying. God help us. God help us to do that. The Bible talks about Jesus. I mentioned some of his tears, but remember the one when he was coming into Jerusalem and it said he stopped and he wept over Jerusalem. Oh, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, if you had only known your time, your opportunity, but now it's lost. Have you ever wept over people like that? Jesus did. I think it's a sign of a soul that has strong passion. We need to weep over a dying world, over a world that has lost its way, a world that is consumed with darkness, a world that is under the power of witchcraft and curses. We need to pray, and not just pray, we need to weep over them. This is why Esther was able to overcome. It's why she was able to accomplish the deliverance of her people. In this seemingly impossible situation, she turned it around because she knew when to kneel, she knew when to stand. The passion that burned within her, the passion that motivated her, the passion that kept her, the passion that was beautiful within her. All of this is what makes her the deliverer of her people. And we all can learn from that. May God help us not to have dry eyes. No, God help us to know when to weep over a lost world, over a dying world. Because if we do that and we do it right, then God will be able to use our lives to change our world. We can make a difference. I just returned from southern Mexico, and what I see God has done among those people brings me to tears. And many times I just stand and cry and weep, because I can remember when it was not this way. And now as I see the great things that God is doing, as Jesus said, how blessed are your eyes that you see these things that are happening, because many righteous men, many prophets did not live to see this. Your eyes are blessed indeed. If we are blessed, then we need to be grateful. And one of the ways we show that passion is the tears within us. I challenge you, develop a passion for God, a passion for souls, a passion for a lost and dying world. And you can make a difference in the world in which we live. I pray that this lesson will help you to focus on the passion, because we are not going to fulfill the Great Commission without passion. It cannot be done. It's the fire that burns within our bones. May God bless you on your Christian journey.